The morning sun had barely risen over the small village of Kwaso when Mama Adiza shuffled to her usual spot under the ancient baobab tree. Her bones ached more than usual today, but she ignored the pain. The tomatoes in her woven basket were fresh, bright red, plump, and glistening with dew. They were all she had left. For years, Mama Adiza had sold tomatoes here, ever since her husband, Kwame, had passed away, leaving her with nothing but a crumbling mud house and memories. The villagers knew her as the quiet widow who never complained, even when her own stomach growled louder than the market crowds. That morning, as she arranged her tomatoes, a shadow fell over her stall. She looked up to see a boy, no older than 10, standing before her. His school uniform was frayed at the edges, his shoes barely holding together. But it was his eyes that struck her, hollow with hunger, yet burning with something fierce. Determination. He didn't speak. Instead, he held out a crumpled piece of paper, his hands trembling. Mama Adiza smoothed it open. Scrawled in messy handwriting was a note from his teacher. Emmanuel has not eaten in 3 days. If anyone can help. The words blurred before her eyes. She knew hunger too well. Without a word, Mama Adiza reached into her basket, selected 3 of her finest tomatoes, and pressed them into Emmanuel's hands. Then, from the small pouch tied around her waist, her secret savings, coin by coin, she slipped him a few bills. "Come, back tomorrow," she whispered. Emmanuel's eyes widened. He opened his mouth to protest, but Mama Adiza shook her head. "Go, before you're late for school." As the boy ran off, clutching the food like treasure, Mama Adiza sighed. She didn't know it then, but this small act would change both their lives forever. Little did she also know that the crumpled note held a secret, one that would only unravel years later, when fate would bring them face to face again under very different circumstances. The days turned into weeks, and Emmanuel became a silent shadow at Mama Adiza's stall. Every morning, like clockwork, he would appear just as the first light touched the village, his empty stomach growling louder than his timid voice. Mama Adiza never asked for a single coin in return. Instead, she fed him, sometimes tomatoes, sometimes boiled yam or a handful of groundnuts she had roasted the night before. She would watch as he devoured the food, his thin frame slowly filling out, his eyes losing that desperate, sunken look. But it wasn't just food she gave him. One rainy afternoon, when the market was empty and the skies wept heavy tears, Mama Adiza noticed Emmanuel's torn school bag, his books nearly ruined from the downpour. Without hesitation, she reached beneath her wooden stall and pulled out an old, weather-beaten umbrella, the last gift her husband had ever given her. "Take it," she said, pressing it into his hands. Emmanuel shook his head, his lips trembling. "But this is yours." Mama Adiza only smiled, her wrinkled face softening. "And now it is yours, so you can keep learning." As the months passed, their bond deepened in ways neither of them expected. Emmanuel began stopping by in the evenings, not just for food, but to tell Mama Adiza about his day, the math problems he had solved, the stories his teacher had read, the dreams he carried in his heart. One evening, as the fireflies danced in the twilight, he whispered something that made Mama Adiza's breath catch. "I want to be a doctor," he said, his voice barely audible, "so I can help people. Like you help me." Mama Adiza didn't respond right away. Instead, she reached into the folds of her faded wrapper and pulled out a small cloth-wrapped bundle. Her life savings, painstakingly collected over decades. Coins, a few crumpled bills, even a single gold earring she had kept hidden for emergencies. She pressed it into Emmanuel's palm, closing his fingers around it. "Then you will be one," she said firmly. Emmanuel's eyes filled with tears. "I can't take this," he protested, but Mama Adiza shook her head. "It is not for you. It is for the doctor you will become." That night, as Emmanuel walked home clutching the bundle to his chest, he made a silent promise, one he would carry with him for the rest of his life. But what neither of them knew was that fate had other plans. A storm was coming, one that would test their bond in ways they couldn't yet imagine. For deep in the shadows of the village, whispers had begun to spread. Whispers about Mama Adiza's mysterious past, about the reason she had no children of her own, about the secrets buried beneath her gentle smile. And soon those secrets would rise to the surface, threatening to destroy everything. The years rolled by like the slow, steady flow of the river that bordered the village, and Emmanuel grew into a tall, serious young man with eyes that still held the quiet gratitude of that hungry boy who had once stood before Mama Adiza's tomato stall. He had done the impossible. He had left Kwaso, his intellect and determination earning him a scholarship to study medicine in the city. Mama Adiza had watched him go with a heart full of pride and a secret ache, for though she had never spoken it aloud, he had become the son she never had. She remembered the day he left, how he had knelt before her in the dust, his grown-up voice breaking as he promised, "I will come back for you." She had waved him off with a smile, but inside she knew the truth. The world was vast, and men forgot. Life had a way of swallowing promises whole. Back in the village, Mama Adiza's stall remained under the baobab tree, but the seasons had not been kind. Her hands, once quick and sure as she arranged her tomatoes, now trembled with age. The villagers still bought from her, but fewer each year, and the coins she earned were barely enough to keep her mud-walled home from crumbling around her. Worse still, a deep, gnawing pain had begun to settle in her chest, a relentless visitor that left her breathless in the night. She ignored it as long as she could, chewing bitter herbs to dull the ache, but one morning she collapsed beside her stall, her vision swimming as the world tilted sideways. The market women rushed to her side, their voices sharp with alarm, but when they asked about family, about anyone who could help, Mama Adiza only shook her head. There was no one, or so she thought. Far away in the city, Emmanuel was in the middle of a surgery when his pager buzzed insistently against his hip. He ignored it at first, his focus unshakable as he worked to save the life beneath his hands, but when the same number flashed again and again, a cold dread slithered down his spine. Something was wrong. Later, in the stark glow of the hospital hallway, he listened as the voice on the other end of the phone, a woman from Kwaso, a stranger, told him Mama Adiza was dying. The words hit him like a physical blow. He had always meant to return, had sent money when he could, but the demands of his studies, his residency, the relentless march of time, they had all conspired to keep him away. Now, as he stood there, gripping the phone, the memories rushed back, her calloused hands pressing food into his, the way she had sold her only good dress to pay for his school fees, the life savings she had given him without a second thought. And he had left her alone. That night, Emmanuel made a decision that would alter the course of both their lives. He packed his bags, called in every favor he had, and arranged for a specialist to meet him in Kwaso. But as his car sped toward the village, wheels kicking up dust on the familiar road, he had no idea what awaited him. Not just a sick woman, but the unraveling of a secret Mama Adiza had buried for decades. A secret that would change everything he thought he knew about her, about himself, and about the true meaning of family. The journey back to Kwaso felt endless, each mile stretching longer than the last as Emmanuel's car rattled over potholes and cracked roads that hadn't been repaired in decades. The landscape was both achingly familiar and strangely foreign. The same towering palm trees swaying in the wind, the same red earth staining the horizon. But the village itself seemed smaller, quieter, as if life had slowly bled out of it over the years. When he finally arrived, the sight of Mama Adiza's crumbling home struck him like a knife to the chest. The walls, once sturdy and proud, now sagged under the weight of neglect. the thatched roof patched haphazardly with scraps of plastic and rusted tin. The tomato stall under the baobab tree was gone, the space it once occupied now just an empty patch of packed earth where chickens pecked aimlessly at the ground. Inside the dim, airless room, Mama Adiza lay on a thin mat, her breathing shallow, her skin stretched tight over bones that seemed too prominent. The village healer hovered nearby, grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle, but the hopelessness in the old woman's eyes told Emmanuel all he needed to know. They had done everything they could. When Mama Adiza's eyelids fluttered open and her clouded gaze landed on him, a weak smile touched her lips. "You came," she whispered as if she had never truly believed he would. Emmanuel fell to his knees beside her, gripping her frail hand, his throat too tight to speak. The guilt was a living thing inside him, gnawing at his ribs. How could he have stayed away so long? How could he have let her suffer like this? The specialist Emmanuel had brought with him, a renowned cardiologist from the city, examined Mama Adiza with a practiced efficiency, but the grim set of his mouth said more than words ever could. Later, outside the hut where Mama Adiza slept fitfully, the doctor delivered the diagnosis in hushed tones: advanced heart disease, compounded by years of malnutrition and exhaustion. "She needs surgery. Immediately," the doctor said, and even then. He didn't finish the sentence. Emmanuel didn't need him to. The unspoken words hung between them like a death sentence. But Emmanuel had spent years fighting against impossible odds, first to escape poverty, then to survive medical school, then to prove himself in a world that had never expected much from a boy like him. He wasn't about to give up now. As arrangements were made to transport Mama Adiza to the city, Emmanuel took a moment to step back into her hut, his eyes scanning the sparse belongings she had accumulated over a lifetime: a cracked mirror, a single cooking pot, a faded photograph tucked into the rafters, its edges curled with age. He reached for it, his breath catching when he saw the image. A younger Mama Adiza, her face unlined, her smile bright, standing beside a man who could only be her late husband. But it was the child in her arms that made Emmanuel's heart stop. A baby, no more than a few months old, wrapped in a patterned cloth. A child with eyes that looked hauntingly familiar. A noise at the door made him turn. The village healer stood there, her gaze dropping to the photo in his hands. "She never told you, did she?" the old woman murmured, her voice heavy with sorrow. Emmanuel's pulse roared in his ears. "Told me what?" The healer hesitated, then sighed. "That baby was hers. Her son. He died the same year her husband did. Fever took him in 3 days. After that, she never spoke of him again. Not until you came along." The world tilted. Emmanuel stared down at the photo, his mind reeling. All those years of kindness, of sacrifice. Had he just been a replacement for the child she had lost? Was that why she had given him everything? The questions burned, but as he looked at Mama Adiza's sleeping form, her chest rising and falling with labored breaths, he knew one thing for certain. It didn't matter. Love was love, no matter where it began. But the healer wasn't finished. "There's more," she said quietly. "Something else she never told you. About where you really came from." The weight of the healer's words pressed down on Emmanuel like a physical force, his mind spinning as he struggled to process what she had just revealed. The air inside the hut felt suddenly thick, suffocating, each breath coming harder than the last as the old woman's piercing gaze held his, her wrinkled face etched with a knowing sorrow that spoke of decades carrying secrets too heavy for one person to bear. "What do you mean, where I really came from?" Emmanuel heard himself ask, his voice sounding distant and strange to his own ears, as though someone else were speaking through him. The healer glanced toward Mama Adiza's sleeping form, ensuring she remained undisturbed, before motioning for Emmanuel to follow her outside into the fading golden light of evening, where the cicadas had begun their nightly chorus. Beneath the sprawling branches of the ancient baobab tree, the very spot where Mama Adiza's tomato stall once stood, the healer began to unravel a story Emmanuel could never have anticipated. "The year you came to this village," she started, her voice barely above a whisper, "was the same year the great famine swept through the northern regions. Many families sent their children away, hoping strangers might feed them when they couldn't." She paused, her dark eyes searching Emmanuel's face as if seeing him properly for the first time. "You appeared one morning, half-starved, your clothes hanging off you like rags. No note, no explanation, just a boy who needed saving." The words landed like blows, each one reshaping Emmanuel's understanding of his past. That crumpled school note he'd carried, the one Mama Adiza had read with such pity, had never been his to begin with. It had belonged to another boy, another life. A cold realization slithered through Emmanuel's veins. All these years he'd believed his parents had simply been too poor to care for him, that they had reluctantly let him go. But the truth was far more devastating. He had been abandoned completely, left to wander until chance brought him to Mama Adiza's stall. And she, grieving the loss of her own child, had chosen to love him anyway. The magnitude of that sacrifice threatened to buckle his knees. She hadn't just given him food or money. She had given him an identity, a future, a reason to hope when the world had offered him none. Inside the hut, Mama Adiza stirred, her weak voice calling out Emmanuel's name in the way she always had, softly, lovingly, as though speaking to something precious. The sound shattered the moment, pulling Emmanuel back from the edge of an emotional abyss. The healer gripped his arm with surprising strength, her fingers like brittle twigs but her resolve unshakable. "She never wanted you to know," she murmured, urgently. "She feared you'd think her love was conditional, that she only cared for you because she'd lost her own son. But that wasn't it at all." A single tear traced its way down the old woman's weathered cheek. "She saw you, truly saw you, from the very first moment, and she chose you." Emmanuel stood frozen, caught between the past and present, between the boy he'd been and the man he'd become. Somewhere in the distance, the car engine idled, ready to carry Mama Adiza toward the medical care she so desperately needed. But before they could leave, there was one question burning in Emmanuel's chest, one truth he needed to hear from the only mother he'd ever known. Steeling himself, he turned back toward the hut, toward the woman who had saved him in every way possible. What he didn't yet realize was that this confrontation would unearth an even deeper secret, one that connected their fates long before that fateful day at the tomato stall, a twist of destiny so profound it would redefine the very meaning of family for both of them. The hut seemed darker now, the air thick with the scent of medicinal herbs and the slow, labored breathing of the woman who had shaped Emmanuel's life in ways he was only beginning to understand. He knelt beside Mama Adiza's mat, the photograph of her lost child still clutched in his trembling hand, his heart pounding so violently he was certain she must hear it. Her eyes fluttered open, cloudy with pain but still so deeply familiar, the same eyes that had watched over him through childhood fevers and teenage heartbreaks, that had sparkled with pride when he left for the city. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. What could he even say? How did you ask the woman who had given you everything whether her love had ever truly been yours to begin with? But Mama Adiza surprised him, as she always had. Her frail hand reached up, her fingers brushing the photograph in his grip, and she smiled, a sad, knowing smile that held lifetimes of sorrow and quiet joy. "You found him," she whispered, her voice like dry leaves rustling. Emmanuel's breath caught. "I didn't know," he managed, the words thick in his throat. "I didn't know you'd lost a son." Her fingers tightened around his, the ghost of the strength she'd once had. "Not lost," she corrected gently. "Given." The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. Emmanuel frowned, uncomprehending. until Mama Adiza took a shuddering breath and spoke the truth she'd buried for decades. Her child hadn't died of fever. In the brutal years after her husband's passing, with no money and no way to feed herself, she had made the impossible choice to give her baby to a wealthy merchant's family passing through the village, a family who could give him the life she never could. "I thought it was kindness," she confessed, tears spilling down her sunken cheeks. "But every day after, I wondered. Every child I saw, I searched their faces for his." Her grip on Emmanuel's hand became almost painful. "And then you came. Not just any boy. My boy." Emmanuel's blood ran cold. No, it couldn't be. The dates, the timeline, none of it made sense. But Mama Adiza was already nodding, her eyes boring into his with a desperate intensity. "The birthmark," she whispered, "on your left shoulder, shaped like a crescent moon." Emmanuel recoiled as if struck. The mark he'd had since birth, the one even the orphanage records had noted. His head spun, the room tilting dangerously around. Him. It wasn't possible. And yet, the way she had always looked at him, the way she'd given him everything without hesitation, the way she'd loved him so completely, so unconditionally, from the very first day. Not because he reminded her of the son she'd lost, but because he was her son. Outside, the car horn sounded, the doctor urging them to hurry. But Emmanuel couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process the enormity of what he'd just learned. All those years of believing himself abandoned, only to discover he'd been found. By her. By the woman who had sacrificed everything not out of grief, but out of a love so fierce it defied all logic. Mama Adiza's fingers brushed his cheek, her touch feather-light. "I didn't tell you," she murmured, "because I wanted you to fly without chains, to become who you were meant to be." Her breath hitched, a sudden spasm of pain twisting her features. "But you were always mine." And as Emmanuel gathered her into his arms as he carried her toward the waiting car and the chance at a future he refused to let slip away, one devastating thought echoed in his mind. What if they were too late? What if, after all these years of searching and being found, of losing and being loved, he had only just gotten her back, only to lose her forever? The city hospital hummed with a constant undercurrent of noise. Beeping machines, hurried footsteps, the occasional muffled sob from a distant corridor, but in Mama Adiza's private room, time seemed to move differently, slower, more deliberately, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Emmanuel hadn't left her side since they'd arrived, his medical training warring with his fear in a way he'd never experienced before. He'd assisted in countless surgeries, had stood calm and composed as lives hung in the balance. But this was different. This was the woman who had given him life twice over, first through blood, then through boundless, selfless love. The monitors attached to her frail body tracked each faltering heartbeat, each shallow breath, the lines on the screen rising and falling like the unreliable waves of a storm-tossed sea. The surgery had been risky, the doctors had warned him. Her heart was weak, her body exhausted from years of hardship. But Mama Adiza had surprised them all, as she always did. When the lead surgeon finally emerged, his mask pulled down to reveal a weary but triumphant smile, Emmanuel nearly collapsed. With relief. "She's a fighter," the surgeon said, clapping him on the shoulder. "With proper care, she could have years left." The words washed over Emmanuel like a baptism, cleansing the fear that had clung to him since he'd carried her limp form from that crumbling hut. Years. They would have years. As Mama Adiza began her slow recovery, Emmanuel made arrangements that would have seemed impossible all those years ago when he was just a hungry boy with nothing but a crumpled note. He purchased land in the village, not just a home, but a proper clinic with bright walls and clean floors, stocked with medicines and staffed by doctors who would care for the people of Quaso as he now cared for her. And on the very spot where her tomato stall once stood, he built something new, a small, open-air kitchen where hot meals would be served daily to any child who needed them. No questions asked, no payment required, just as she had done for him. The morning they returned. To the village, the air was thick with the scent of approaching rain. Mama Adiza, stronger now but still leaning on Emmanuel's arm, paused as they approached the new buildings. Her eyes, those same wise, loving eyes that had seen so much suffering and so much joy, filled with tears. "You did all this?" she asked, her voice trembling. Emmanuel shook his head, helping her settle onto a bench beneath the baobab tree, its branches stretching protectively over them just as they had all those years ago. "We did," he corrected gently. "Everything I am, everything I have, it's because of you." Around them, the village stirred to life. Children laughed as they lined up at the new kitchen, their plates piled high with food. Elders chatted excitedly as they peeked into the clinic, marveling at the gleaming equipment. And through it all, Mama Adiza sat quietly, her hand clasped in Emmanuel's, her face turned toward the sun. The past, with all its secrets and sorrows, didn't disappear. It never could. But here, now, in this moment they had fought so hard for, it no longer mattered how their story had begun. What mattered was this: the boy she had saved her in return. The mother who had lost everything had been found, and the love that had sustained them through hunger and hardship, through secrets and second chances, would continue to grow, not just in the walls of the clinic or the lines at the kitchen, but in every child who would never know the ache of an empty stomach, in every life that would be changed because one poor widow had once looked at a hungry boy and seen not a stranger, but her own. As the first drops of rain began to fall, Emmanuel squeezed Mama Adiza's hand, the crescent moon, birthmark on his shoulder hidden beneath his clothes but forever binding them together. The villagers would talk for generations about the miracle of the widow and the doctor, about how love had built something where there had once been nothing. But for Emmanuel, the truth was simpler and far more profound. All of it, the clinic, the kitchen, the life he had built, was just an echo, a reflection, the natural and inevitable result of a single, unshakable truth. When you have been loved as fiercely as he had been loved, you cannot help but love fiercely in return. And so he did.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.